love talking about myself, sure. Good. Been doing it for days here. So I started really falling in love with whiskey when I moved to Scotland. You can hear from my accent, I'm not from Scotland, but moved there in 2002 and didn't know anyone, so I joined a whiskey club and started learning about whiskey. I went along and there were people sat around going, oh yes, it's divine, oh yeah. So there was that snooty attitude, but there were guys teaching about whiskey. And there was one guy, Andrew, who started telling me that there were all these different single malt distilleries. I had no idea. I thought whiskey was sort of a monolith, one thing, Scotch was Scotch was Scotch. So my eyes were opened, I felt groovy when I walked home, and I just became enamored with whiskey. So I started reading about it. There was not a lot online at the time, to be honest. There was much less than there is today. And I got into the history of it, the taste, the diversity of flavor, and it just started from there in 2002 when I moved to Scotland. Wow. From that, I started running a whiskey club. I ended up running this whiskey club with some friends, grew the club, visited distilleries, met whiskey makers who've always been kind and welcoming. I started a blog called Dr Whisky. I worked with Sukhinder Singh in the Whiskey Exchange. So I was fortunate to get a lot of good support and experience in whiskey while pursuing a PhD and trying to teach university.
Wow.
And then my friends started jokingly calling me Dr. Whisky because I ended up professing more about whiskey than anything else. And then, yeah, eventually I got invited to work with the Balvenie, which was the first bottle I ever bought. Actually, Dublin was the first bottle I bought when I moved to Scotland. And I was proud to take that opportunity and moved to New York, started as the US ambassador, and then 2 years later was invited to be the global ambassador, and here I am now.
Wow, that's living the dream, isn't it?
It's ridiculous. Yeah, I'm a very lucky man.
Awesome.
So David Sewart, our malt master, he started the company in 1962, did not know he was going to end up in this role. So I think that's important to set up an answer to that question, because he is a modest, unassuming guy. He doesn't think that he has some special gift or that he was always destined to have this job. He started as a stocks clerk, the way he tells the story, looking after the books and helping the inventory team, the warehousing team, and the planning of future stocks and stuff. But was fortunate enough to be brought in by his mentor, Hamish, to nose and taste. And he realized at a young age that there's a chance that if he follows this training, he could be the only person in the company who has this special skill. And he worked hard at it, obviously. And I think because all this, because he never assumed the right to have it, or never thought he was destined to be in this role, he still is the most soft-spoken, humble, modest man who's achieved a lot. I mean, he's a great listener, obviously, and he borrows techniques throughout his 50 years with the company. He's borrowed techniques from wine, from sherry production, from different industries to better the craft of whiskey making. And that's the real test, I think, of a craftsman. So you can learn the science, you can learn the art, but to really be a craftsman, it's the experience. And so he's always built on experience upon experience and bettered the whole industry for it, I think. Right, so the second part's going to be a hard one to answer, but I love the idea of this compendium. So David's been with the company a long time and will need to pass over knowledge. And he's worked with an apprentice, with Brian Kinsman, for over 10 years. He's imparted knowledge to people he's met around the world, myself included, and he continues to do so. But the idea came to us that we could try to collect that information, that knowledge that's really only in his head, and try to collect it in a way that's tangible to pass on the knowledge. So I wrote a book interviewing David, asking questions, trying to contextualize all of his experience and pass on the things he's learned in the industry. And then we separated themes into different chapters, themes of his knowledge into different chapters, to try and capture all that accumulated knowledge in literary and in liquid form. So he then went to select casks along the lines of those themed chapters. So there's distillery character, like what does Balvenie taste like at 9, at 17, at 30? What's the quintessential Balvenie note?
Right.
No one will have seen that before. So showing parts of the distillery that no one's seen before. I think I'm not sure my favorite whiskey from the compendium, but my favorite concept or my favorite chapter of the compendium would be this chapter that we call Secrets of the Stock Model. Okay. So until now, most companies, we don't reveal much. I mean, whiskey is quite a transparent industry, and I've always been grateful for that. You can ask questions to people and they tell you the answer. You can go to distilleries and see inside. So it's quite special to begin with. But basically opening the ledgers and saying, here are the secrets of Balvenie stock model. We didn't make enough whiskey in this year. We only made this type of cask in this year. We're completely empty from this year. And finding the little gems and pearls to reveal the truth about being a malt master like David Sewart. The truth is, it's really about being a stocks manager, predicting and working with the stock that you have with a vision to the future, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And that's a real skill. And I think that's a cool thing that no one's ever done before. So whether it's my favorite whiskey of the compendium or not, I'm not sure. But as a concept, it's pretty exciting as a whiskey geek to see behind the scenes, if you like. Right, so it's good you phrased it like that because we can answer it in different ways. Because I am a whiskey lover, but I also work for a distillery that I love, and we have the freedom to shape the direction of the distillery.
Right.
But we wouldn't really be able to do any of that if the family and David Sewart hadn't had the foresight to overfill. We have mature stock. We have whiskey of great age. We have plenty of whiskey at 12 and at ages that we sell most of our stock at. So we're comfortable with the age statement. On a personal level, NAS isn't something new. You know, that's the thing to remember. I think no age statement, it's been around for a long time. And when single malt started coming out 8-year-old, it was like, wow, that's super old. So the perception that 12 is the minimum is also a relatively recent thing. So no age statement doesn't mean bad, it doesn't mean good, but there is, like you said, there's a bit of mystery. We don't know what's in the bottle. For an industry that's built a reputation on credibility and transparency, to suddenly go to sort of a cognac technique and just saying, leave it to you to trust us, there's good whiskey inside, is a bit unfair. It's a confusing category as it is. Funny names, Bruichladdich, Laphroaig, all these weird names. To not be able to benchmark a whiskey against a whiskey because they're named after a Norse god or they're named after a color of a rainbow or whatever it is, it's tricky. It's a hard thing to navigate as a whiskey drinker. And then you start, unfortunately, you end up navigating the category by price. And that's probably not a great way to discern taste necessarily. So I do think we're quite lucky that we have mature stock. We're able to bottle it with age statements. And the other thing I would say is a lot of the arguments I've heard justifying no age statement is that, well, then the blender has the opportunity to mix from different years and make something more than the sum of its parts. And that's true. David Sewart does that with Tun 1401. And we feel putting an age statement, which would be 21 if we had to, on the bottle undersells the whiskey. So I get it. And you don't want to do that with Macallan's or with certain releases across the industry because it would devalue what's the quality of the liquid inside. I get that. But the thing to remember is when a bottle says 12 years old or 14, by law, that's the minimum guarantee.
That's right.
So the argument's flawed right off the top because you're welcome to use 30-year-old whiskey in the 12-year-old. If you want to take from different years, you can.
Sure.
So there's nothing about the current law or the current tradition in whiskey with an age statement that keeps a blender from being creative and building flavors. You can use minimum 12-year-old whiskey, maximum 50-year-old whiskey to make your 12-year-old. So I don't really get the argument around NAS personally. But again, I buy NAS, no age statement whiskeys. If they're nice, absolutely. But it's a tricky thing when you walk into a shop and there's 100 whiskeys on the shelf and they're all named different arbitrary things. It's a hard thing to know which one I want to buy. My fear would be over time we'd end up with a smoky one, a sweet one, and a spicy one. We'd lose all the distilleries of Scotland. Water in this job. Yeah, you got to stay hydrated. Now, I fell in love with whiskey. That's how I ended up in a job like this. So I like all different single malts. But I would say at home, the 5 whiskeys that get filled the most, or I should say emptied and then restocked on my shelf, partly due to my wife as well. But we drink Johnny Walker Black, we drink Lagavulin 16, we drink Highland Park 18. I drink Balvenie Dubwood, I drink Glenfiddich 18-year-old. And I drink Clynelish, usually independent bottlings of Clynelish. So I like sweeter style of whiskeys. But you need something for different moods. You do need to have something smoky. You need to have a cask strength sherry expression on your shelf for that mood. You need something sweet, something spicy. So you need those varieties represented on your shelf. And it's hard to get from just one distillery. I mean, Balvenie does a good job of giving different flavors. By finishing in rum or finishing in port, you get not only different age, but a different flavor characteristic. So you get quite a lot from just one range. But yeah, I'm promiscuous as every other Scotch whiskey drinker.